start our discussion of today's topic in class, which is fermentation, I'm going to start a little experiment. I have a small Coke bottle with warm water in it, and I've put a funnel into it to make it a little neater. And I've got a package of dry yeast. I'm going to put the yeast into the warm water. Yeast needs the warm water in order to activate. Then I'm going to give the yeast a little something to work with. And that something is sugar. I'm going to swirl it all around in here to get it to mix. And stick a balloon on the neck of the bottle. And we will come back to this demonstration at the end of the lesson to see what has happened and why you think what happens happened. Remember from class yesterday what cellular respiration is? Here is the formula for cellular respiration, which we learned in class yesterday. That's glucose, the long formula with 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, plus oxygen in the air we breathe. And cellular respiration transforms these reactants into the products: carbon dioxide, what we breathe out, plus water, plus energy, the stuff we need to move and think and run and play. Thinking back to what we learned yesterday about cellular respiration and looking at this chemical equation, do you think cellular respiration is aerobic or anaerobic? That's right, it's aerobic because it requires and uses oxygen, as you can see on the left side of the equation where the reactants are. Who can tell me where cellular respiration occurs? That's right, in the mitochondria. Cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria all except for that first stage you can see on the left called glycolysis. That part occurs in the cytoplasm. We're going to hear more about glycolysis in just a little bit. What happens when we're swimming in the water or when we dive underneath the water and hold our breath and there's no more oxygen for our cells? Do we just collapse because our cells don't have any oxygen to keep moving? What happens when we're swimming and we're underwater? We said that cellular respiration requires oxygen. It's aerobic. But if there's no more oxygen in our cells to keep cellular respiration going, what happens? There must be something else going on to keep our cells moving so that we can keep on swimming and keep on holding our breath for a little while longer. What happens when we're running on the track or trying to get away from a lion? That's right, we start breathing really fast and deeply. Why? Because we're trying to get more oxygen into our cells so we can do cellular respiration. But when we've been running for way too long trying to get away from that lion, our cells just can't get enough oxygen. There must be some other thing going on to provide energy for our cells so that we can keep on running. There's another process for getting energy to our cells when we're holding our breath underwater or when we're running too fast for our cells to be able to get enough oxygen to keep on using cellular respiration. That process for getting energy is called fermentation. This other process that gives us energy when there's no oxygen or not enough oxygen around is called fermentation, which releases energy from our food by producing energy in the absence of oxygen. Notice that in this chemical equation, there's no oxygen to be found anywhere. Our reactant is sugar or food. Our products are carbon dioxide and alcohol. Who has ever heard of fermentation? Yes, it's how alcohol is made. For example, grapes have to ferment for a while in order to turn into wine. It's actually the sugar in the grapes that turns into alcohol. Well, that's one form of fermentation anyway. There's another kind of fermentation that happens in our bodies. And instead of producing alcohol, that kind of fermentation produces something called lactic acid. Lactic acid is what makes your muscles burn when you've been running for a long time. There's another difference between alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, and that is that alcohol fermentation makes carbon dioxide, kind of like cellular respiration does. We're going to see this at the end of class when we look at the demonstration I started up here, remember? But in lactic acid fermentation, which happens in our bodies, there's no carbon dioxide produced. Now let's think back to cellular respiration again. That's the process we said is aerobic because it requires oxygen to work. Remember that part of cellular respiration on the left side, which we pointed out earlier, called glycolysis? Glycolysis happens not in the mitochondria, as you can see in this drawing, but outside the mitochondria, in the cytoplasm of the cell. It's glycolysis that works in fermentation too. Why do you think glycolysis happens outside the mitochondria? That's right, because glycolysis, which is part of fermentation, doesn't need oxygen. While the Krebs cycle there in the middle you can see, and the electron transport chain there on the right you can see, do require oxygen. As you can tell from this drawing, glycolysis doesn't produce as much energy as the full cellular respiration does. However, if there's no oxygen around, or not enough oxygen, glycolysis can get us through by producing the energy we need. So, whether we're swimming or whether we're running, do we run out of oxygen? Maybe. But do we run out of energy? No way. Fermentation keeps going, giving our cells energy to run, to swim, to walk, even to plan what to wear to the dance Friday night. Now what happened to that yeast that I mixed with some sugar in a bottle with a balloon on top? This is what has happened to this. Now, was any oxygen able to get through this balloon into my mixture of yeast and sugar? No oxygen has been able to get past the balloon into the mixture of yeast and sugar. So has our yeast been doing cellular respiration in order to eat up all that sugar? No way. It's been doing fermentation. There are two types of fermentation. The kind that happens in our bodies produces lactic acid rather than alcohol. The kind that's happening here with this yeast and sugar produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. So what do you think this balloon has been filling with since our yeast friends have been doing alcohol fermentation with the sugar we gave it? That's right, Carbon dioxide is inside this balloon. So let's review one more time. Cellular respiration is what we do most of the time. To get energy, our cells take food, in this drawing shown as glucose, and use oxygen to help break it down to make energy, and also carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, and some water. However, when there's no oxygen around, our cells can still use fermentation to make energy. Humans use lactic acid fermentation. Remember, that's what makes your muscles burn when you've been running hard. And things like the yeast we just saw can use alcohol fermentation, which produces a balloon full of carbon dioxide. Now see if you can complete this Venn diagram on cellular respiration and fermentation. Remember that there will be some things in common between the two, and these things will go in the middle overlapping section. The things that are only part of cellular respiration or only part of fermentation will go under those names on the left side or the right side. Take a few moments now to complete this diagram.